The prison smelled of rust, metal, and fear. Alarms echoed through the corridors, and guards walked past the cells with heavy boots that made the walls tremble. In the center of the prison, the kitchen was a place most avoided. It was dark, crowded, and always hot. The human chef, Kale, moved among the pots and pans quietly, careful not to draw attention. Every day felt like a countdown to the moment someone would finally decide his life was no longer worth keeping. He was supposed to die here, forgotten, just another body among thousands. Kale had not always been a prisoner. Once he had been a chef on a starship, cooking meals for diplomats and soldiers alike. But a false accusation had landed him here, on a planet where punishment was severe and mercy was rare. The prison was underground, built into a rocky canyon, and its walls were carved from black stone that seemed to absorb every sound. Most prisoners spent their days in silence, staring at the walls, waiting for time to pass, waiting for death. But Kale had found one small piece of hope in an unusual routine. Every Friday, the prison authorities dumped leftover food into a massive pit beneath the prison. It was meant for nothing, a disgusting mixture of scraps, spoiled meat, and old bread. Prisoners were forbidden to go near it. Guards laughed when they tossed the food, thinking no one cared. But Kale had noticed something strange. Sometimes the pit shifted, the metal chains rattled, and a strange, low sound came from deep within. Something lived down there. Something big. At first, Kale had ignored it. After all, what could a human do against a creature large enough to shake the ground? But curiosity won over fear. On the next Friday, he secretly took some of the better scraps, vegetables, fresh meat, spices he could steal from the storage, and carefully placed them in the pit. He spoke softly as he did so, words meant for no one but the darkness. "Here," he said, "I hope this helps." The sound from the pit was different this time. It was a low, resonant growl, not threatening but curious. Kale froze, heart pounding, thinking the guards would notice. But the growl faded, replaced by silence. He kept feeding it each week, each time adding a little more care. He washed his hands, cut the meat evenly, and even carved shapes into the bread. It seemed silly even to himself, but he felt a strange satisfaction in the act. He began to think of the creature as more than a monster. He began to think of it as a friend. Weeks passed and Kale noticed changes. The low growls in the pit became softer, almost like a purr. The chains rattled less violently, and sometimes he thought he saw shadows move in ways that suggested intelligence, not instinct. He imagined the creature watching him, learning from his actions. Kale spoke while he cooked, telling stories of Earth, of spices, of the people he had known. He spoke about simple things like sunsets, rivers, and the smell of baking bread. At first it felt like he was talking to nothing, but over time he imagined responses in the subtle shifts and sounds from the pit. Other prisoners began to notice the strange behavior. Kale was no longer just a human in the kitchen. He was someone who smiled quietly, even in the face of despair. They whispered rumors about the pit, about a creature that had grown stronger, about Kale feeding it every week. No one dared approach him directly, but some left scraps of their own, small offerings, in the hopes of earning the favor of whatever lived below. Kale himself never expected anything in return. He knew his life was fragile. He had heard the screams from the execution chamber, smelled the smoke of burning bodies. Death was always nearby, a patient visitor. But feeding the creature gave him a sense of purpose, a tiny rebellion against the system that had condemned him. He was small, human, and insignificant, yet here, in the shadows of the prison, he was doing something important. One Friday, Kale arrived with extra care. He had found some rare spices hidden in the kitchen, a gift he could not resist. He sprinkled them over the meat and vegetables, arranging them in neat piles, making the pit smell like a feast. As he lowered the basket, a sound unlike anything he had heard before echoed from the depths. It was deep, almost musical, vibrating through his chest. His hands shook as he listened. It was as if the creature was thanking him. Kale could not see it, but he could feel its presence, its intelligence, its attention. That night, Kale lay on his thin mattress and imagined the creature. He imagined its scales glinting in dim light, its eyes reflecting the soft glow of the pit. He imagined it stretching its wings, its massive body coiled but relaxed. For the first time in months, Kale felt safe. Not because the guards were gone or the prison would change, but because he had made a connection that no one could break. A bond born of food, of patience, and of quiet courage. The other prisoners began to notice a subtle change in the pit as well. The rattling of chains became less frequent, the low growls seemed to have rhythm, almost like understanding. Whispers spread that something unusual was happening. Kale did not speak of it, but he felt a small thrill. The prison world was harsh, cruel, and unforgiving, Yet here below the surface life was different. The creature waited and Kale kept feeding it. A secret pact had formed, silent and unspoken. Friday after Friday the bond grew. Kale learned to time his drops, to speak softly, to read the vibrations in the stone. The dragon, or whatever it was, responded with subtle signs. A shuffle, a ripple in the water at the bottom, a flick of its massive tail. It recognized him, learned to anticipate his movements, trusted him in a way no human in the prison ever could. Kale often thought of what would happen if the creature were freed, if it could rise against the prison and the people who had condemned him. He was scared, yes, but a small part of him hoped. Hope was dangerous here, but it was all he had. And so he continued his quiet rebellion week after week, feeding, speaking, and imagining a world beyond the stone walls where a human and a dragon might stand side by side, neither captive nor prisoner, but friends. The prison remained a place of fear, but for Kale, the kitchen and the pit below had become a sanctuary. He did not know what would come, did not know if the dragon could save him, but he knew one thing. He had made a choice. He had chosen kindness in a place where cruelty was expected. And in that choice, a spark of something extraordinary had begun to grow. Kale woke before dawn as he did every day, to the cold, metallic smell of the prison. The corridors were quiet, and the occasional clanging of metal doors echoed like distant thunder. Even though he had been here for months, he still felt the weight of the prison pressing on him. Every prisoner moved carefully, knowing one wrong step could mean a beating, or worse. Kale had learned to keep his head down, to work quietly in the kitchen, and to speak only when necessary. Yet, despite the fear and silence, he had a secret that gave him strength: the creature in the pit below. It was Friday again and Kale had prepared carefully. He had found some small vegetables, a little fresh meat, and a pinch of spices that were hidden in the kitchen stores. To anyone else these scraps were worthless, but to him they were a gift. He arranged the food neatly in the basket, humming softly to himself. It was a small habit, a ritual that made him feel alive. As he approached the pit, Kale whispered, "I brought something special today. I hope you like it." The pit was silent at first, but then came a low, deep rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. It was different from before, curious, patient, almost expecting. Kale smiled, though no one could see it. He lowered the basket carefully, watching the shadows at the bottom shift slightly as if something massive moved beneath the surface. Over the next weeks, Kale noticed subtle changes. The creature no longer responded only with growls and shuffles. It began to recognize patterns, almost as if it understood his schedule. When Kale hummed, it seemed to respond with gentle vibrations through the pit walls. Sometimes he could feel a brush of air, as if massive wings had moved. He began speaking more as he worked, telling the creature about Earth, about simple things he remembered from his home, about flavors and smells that no one in the prison would ever care about. He spoke of sunsets that painted the sky orange and purple, of rain that smelled like flowers, of warm bread baked on cold mornings. At first it seemed like he was talking to himself or to nothing. But slowly Kale felt a presence listening, understanding, learning. He imagined the creature's eyes following his movements, watching him with attention and intelligence. A bond was forming, fragile and unseen, but stronger than anything in the prison above. The prison itself was harsh and unchanging. Guards shouted orders, prisoners argued, and the smell of fear was constant. Yet, below the floor, in the shadow of the pit, something extraordinary was growing. The creature had begun to trust him. Kale could feel it in the vibrations that pulsed through the stone. It was aware of him, not as prey or threat, but as a companion. He wondered sometimes if it had always been intelligent, or if his acts of care had awakened something in it. Kale also noticed how the creature seemed to understand caution. When he approached, it would move just enough to be seen but not too close. It seemed curious about his voice, the rhythm of his movements, the care he took in arranging the food. It waited, silently, learning him as he learned it. The connection was quiet, built without words, without sight, without touch. It was trust formed in the dark, in the silence of a place meant for despair. Other prisoners had begun to whisper about the pit. Some claimed they heard strange sounds, while others said the basket sometimes disappeared before it hit the bottom. No one dared ask Kale directly, but a few left small scraps at the edge of the pit, hoping to gain favor or avoid the creature's wrath. Kale never encouraged them. The bond was his alone, private and fragile. One evening, after the day's cooking was done, Kale sat on his thin mattress, listening to the distant echoes of the prison. He imagined the creature moving deep below, massive wings stretching in the dark, scales glinting faintly in imagined light. He whispered stories as if it could see him, recounting tales of courage, of small acts that changed lives, of food that brought people together across worlds. "I wish you could see the stars," he said softly. "They are not like the lights here. They are far and bright, endless." The nights were the hardest. Cale could hear screams from the execution chamber sometimes, and the thought of death always lingered. Yet, the bond he had forged with the creature gave him hope. He imagined that if he died, the creature would remember him, would know that not all humans were weak or cruel. It was a strange comfort, knowing that in a world built on fear and punishment, one act of kindness had created something unbreakable. Weeks turned into months. Cale learned more about the creature through small signs. The vibrations became more deliberate, almost like communication. Sometimes, when he whispered, he thought he could hear the creature respond with faint, musical tones. Other times he could feel gentle taps or shifts through the stone. He did not yet know the full extent of its intelligence, but he understood that it recognized him, valued him, and perhaps, in its way, cared for him. Cale continued his quiet routine, cooking with care, speaking softly, and arranging each basket with attention. The prison above remained cruel and unforgiving, but below the floor, in the darkness of the pit, a silent alliance was growing. Cale was small, human, and fragile, yet in this act of quiet devotion he had found power. Not power to fight, not power to escape, but power to connect, to influence, and to survive in a place designed to destroy hope. As the weeks passed, Cale realized something extraordinary. The creature in the pit had changed him as much as he had changed it. He no longer felt entirely trapped, no longer entirely hopeless. The bond forged in silence had become his strength, his reason to endure, and his secret joy. Even in a world built on fear, even in a prison where death was expected, Cale had discovered that kindness could thrive, even in the darkest places. And so, every Friday Cale returned to the pit, carrying scraps, spices, and stories. He whispered to the darkness, confident that it was listening, waiting, and learning. He did not yet know what the future held, but for the first time, he believed that perhaps he was not as alone as he had once thought. Somewhere below the prison, in the deep shadows, a creature was watching, aware, and connected to him in a way no one above could ever understand. The morning air in the prison was thick with tension. Today was the day Cale had feared for months, the day the authorities had chosen to make an example of him. Word had spread among the prisoners, a public execution. He walked to the kitchen as usual, but his hands shook slightly as he arranged the food for the pit. Even the smallest ritual felt fragile today. The other prisoners whispered, glancing at him with a mixture of fear and hope. Some knew he would die. Others, for reasons they did not fully understand, believed something unusual was about to happen. Cale prepared the basket carefully, more out of habit than expectation. Meat, vegetables, a pinch of stolen spices, arranged neatly. He spoke softly to the darkness below, "I will not see you today, but I hope you are well." He lowered the basket as usual, and for a moment the pit was silent. Then came a deep, resonant rumble, low and powerful, vibrating through the stone floor. Cale froze, feeling the ground tremble beneath him. The sound was different this time, stronger, more deliberate. The guards arrived at the kitchen, calling his name sharply. "Cale, time is up. Prepare to be taken." He nodded, swallowing hard, and followed them down the narrow corridor. Prisoners lined the route to the execution chamber, faces pale and eyes wide. The guards moved with precision, the kind born from years of carrying out death sentences without question. Cale felt the weight of countless eyes on him, and for the first time he thought about how alone he really was, until the vibration beneath his feet shifted again. As they entered the execution chamber, Cale saw the crowd of prisoners and officials assembled. The room was vast, metal walls polished to reflect the bright overhead lights. At the center, the execution platform waited. Cale was forced to stand on it, his hands bound. The head warden stepped forward, reading the sentence aloud with cold precision. Every word was like ice, cutting into him, but he held his head high, refusing to cry out. He could not show fear, not now, not ever. Suddenly the ground trembled. At first it was subtle, a faint vibration like the warning before a storm. The guards looked down in confusion. The tremor grew stronger and faster, shaking the platform and the walls. Prisoners gasped and stepped back. The lights flickered as the tremor intensified. Cale's heart raced, but he remained still, unsure if it was the beginning of the end or something else entirely. Then a deafening roar echoed through the chamber, shaking the stone walls. The platform beneath Cale shuddered violently, forcing him to crouch to keep his balance. The tremor became a quake as massive wings broke through the stone floor beneath the pit. The creature Kale had fed for months had freed itself. Its roar filled the chamber, reverberating in every corner, shaking the very foundations of the prison. Guards shouted and ran, but they were no match for the sheer force of the dragon rising from the darkness. The dragon's eyes glowed with a fierce, intelligent light. Its scales shimmered even in the harsh artificial lighting, and its massive wings stretched wide, brushing against the chamber walls. It looked at Kale, and for a moment the world felt still. The guards froze, prisoners stared in awe and fear, and Kale realized that the creature was not here to kill recklessly. It was here for him. It recognized him, understood him, and acted with purpose. The head warden tried to command the guards to attack, but his voice was drowned out by the dragon's roar. The ground quaked under their feet, forcing many to fall. The dragon's tail smashed through a column, sending rubble flying, yet it moved carefully, ensuring that Kale remained unharmed. The room filled with dust and panic, but the dragon focused solely on the human who had shown it kindness. Kale could hardly believe what he saw. The creature that had lived in the shadows for months, the one he had fed and spoken to, was now towering before him, powerful and free. It bent its massive head closer, wings folding slightly to fit in the chamber. Its eyes, glowing and intelligent, locked onto Kale's. He felt a strange calm wash over him. The fear that had dominated his life in the prison melted away, replaced by trust. The dragon lowered its head and opened its mouth, not to attack, but to speak. Its voice was deep, resonant, and melodic, carrying through the chamber. "Human," it said, each word deliberate, "you showed kindness when none existed. You are mine to protect." The words echoed in Kale's mind as much as in the air. The guards and wardens stood frozen, realizing that the human they had condemned was now under the protection of a being they could not harm. Prisoners whispered in disbelief. Some fell to their knees, others hid behind columns. The dragon's massive form blocked the light, casting shadows over the room like mountains moving. Kale, still bound, felt the chains loosen around him. He did not need to speak. The dragon's presence alone told him he was safe. Months of small acts of kindness had culminated in this moment, an impossible rescue born from trust, patience, and courage. The warden tried one last command, but the dragon's tail swept across the chamber floor, knocking him to the side. "Enough," the dragon rumbled. "No more cruelty here." The air shimmered with heat and power, and for the first time, the prisoners saw that strength alone did not define the dragon. It was intelligence, judgment, and choice. Kale understood that the creature had watched him all these weeks, not out of hunger, but out of respect and recognition. Kale stepped forward cautiously, still bound but unharmed. He reached out a hand, and the dragon lowered its massive head to his level. Its warm breath washed over him, and for the first time he felt completely safe. The chamber that had once promised death now held freedom and awe. Guards scattered, some fleeing for their lives, others frozen in terror. The prisoners whispered stories they would tell for years. The human who fed a dragon and was saved by it. The dragon bent slightly, allowing Kale to remove his own chains. His hands shook as he touched the metal, feeling the weight of captivity fall away. The dragon's eyes never left him, a silent promise that no harm would come. Kale realized that the bond they had formed in silence was now a shield, more powerful than any sword, more certain than any law. The prisoners began to cheer, some cautiously, others openly. The warden and officials had no power now. The dragon ruled the chamber without violence against the innocent, judging only those who had caused suffering. Kale's heart raced, not from fear, but from a mixture of relief and amazement. The creature he had fed, spoken to, and trusted had become his protector, and in doing so, had shattered the prison's authority. Kale stepped away from the platform, looking up at the dragon towering above him. He whispered softly, "I never thought I would see this day." The dragon's tail curled slightly, a gesture Kale interpreted as acknowledgement. It had freed him not because it was commanded, not because it was hungry, but because he had earned its trust, its respect, and its loyalty. That day the execution failed. Not because of luck, not because of weakness, but because of a bond formed in silence, nurtured by patience and sealed with acts of kindness. Kale understood that the galaxy, with all its cruelty, could not break a connection like this. And as the dragon stretched its wings and rose slightly, casting shadows over the frightened guards, Kale realized that the world he had feared might just be full of unexpected allies, waiting in the darkness for someone to show them trust. The chamber was silent except for the low rumble of the dragon. Kale stood at its side, still shaky from the escape from the execution platform. The prisoners and guards alike stared, frozen with fear and awe. The dragon's massive wings stretched wide, shadowing the entire room, its scales glinting under the harsh lights. Its eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the officials, the wardens, and the guards who had for so long ruled with cruelty. Kale understood in that moment that this was no longer a fight for his life alone. This was a reckoning. The head warden stepped forward, trying to regain control. His voice was trembling but loud. "This creature, step aside. This human is condemned by law. You cannot." The words faltered as the dragon leaned forward slightly, its snout inches from the ground, and spoke in a voice that shook every stone in the chamber. "Law is meaningless when it is built on suffering. You starved, chained, and condemned without mercy. You will answer for your cruelty." The guards shifted nervously. Some tried to step closer to the warden, hoping to regain authority, but the dragon's tail swept slowly across the floor, knocking two of them off their feet. The sound echoed like a thunderclap and the remaining guards froze. The dragon's judgment was clear. It did not attack the innocent, but it would not allow injustice to continue. Kale watched carefully, still unsure if this was real. He had never imagined that the creature he had fed in secret, spoken to in whispers, would rise to protect him in this way. He felt a strange pride, a warmth spreading through his chest. The dragon's eyes, glowing with intelligence, met his. In that look, Kale understood that his quiet acts of kindness had changed the balance of power. His patience, his courage, and his care had earned the dragon's respect. The dragon moved closer to the warden and the council of officials. Its massive claws pressed into the stone floor, leaving deep marks. The air shimmered with heat as it leaned down, and Kale could see the anger in its eyes, tempered by judgment, not rage. "You ignored suffering. You punished without understanding. You believed fear was enough to control." Its voice was deep, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. "You will be remembered for your cruelty, but you will live to witness the consequences of your choices." The warden tried to speak, to assert his authority, but his words caught in his throat. Every prisoner in the chamber stared, some wide-eyed, some whispering to one another. They had lived under the rule of these officials for years, seeing injustice and punishment handed down without mercy. Now, in front of their eyes, a dragon judged not by law, but by morality, by observation, by the acts of a single human who had chosen kindness. Kale stepped forward carefully. He did not speak at first, unsure if the dragon would allow him to. But when he saw the warden trembling, the officials pale, and the guards uncertain, he felt a surge of courage. They starved you," he whispered to the dragon. "They ignored you. They chained you. But I tried to help." The dragon's massive head lowered, and a small gust of warm air brushed Kale's face. "Yes," it rumbled. "You showed compassion when all others showed none. You were small, yet your actions were powerful. You risked your life, and for that, you are under my protection." A murmur ran through the prisoners. They could hardly believe it. A human, bound, weak, and alone, had earned the protection of a creature feared across the sector. The dragon turned its attention back to the officials. "And now you will learn that power is not in fear but in care. You will release those you have wronged. You will repair what you can. You will witness mercy even if it is not your own." The warden looked around frantically, seeking support from his guards. But the guards knew better. None dared act against the dragon. Some had seen its intelligence, its judgment, and even they felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. The dragon had chosen a side, and it was not theirs. Kale began to feel a strange sense of justice unfolding. He had expected death that day, as he had expected every Friday since arriving at the prison. But now, he saw that courage and patience could have consequences beyond his imagination. The dragon had not only saved him, it was showing the galaxy, the prison, and everyone in that chamber what humans were capable of. Not violence, not weapons, but loyalty, kindness, and careful courage. The officials were forced to comply. Prisoners previously condemned were released from chains. Wounds and hunger could not be fully undone, but small gestures of justice began as the dragon supervised, ensuring no one acted cruelly in the name of authority. Kale watched quietly, feeling the truth of something larger than himself. He had been small, human, and helpless. Yet his choices had made a difference in ways he could never have imagined. The dragon shifted, wings brushing the walls, and looked down at Kale. "You have taught me patience, understanding, and care. Others might see humans as weak, small, insignificant. But your actions have proven otherwise. You are not alone, and you are not powerless." Kale swallowed hard, his voice shaking slightly. "I never thought I could matter," he said softly. "I only tried to help." The dragon's rumble was gentle, almost approving. "That is enough," it said. "Small acts can change the world if one has courage to act when all others turn away. You are not just a human. You are proof that even the smallest life can influence the greatest power." The prisoners began to whisper among themselves, amazement spreading through the chamber like wildfire. Some began to cheer quietly, others bowed in respect. Even the guards, once rigid and cruel, understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A human had survived because of courage, kindness, and trust, not fear or strength. Kale felt a lightness in his chest he had not felt in months. The dragon's wings stretched slightly, shading the chamber in shadow and warmth. He realized that he had found not only protection but purpose. His life was no longer merely survival, it was a lesson to others, proof that humanity could inspire loyalty, even from the most ancient and powerful beings. The dragon finally rose fully, wings folding slightly to fit, and its eyes glowed with intelligence and approval. Kale understood that the judgment had ended. Justice had been done not by the laws of the prison, but by the judgment of a being capable of seeing truth. He had not only survived, he had changed the course of that chamber, of those prisoners, and perhaps of the wider galaxy. As Kale stepped back, breathing in the warm air from the dragon's presence, he knew that the prison would never feel the same again. Power had shifted. Fear had been replaced by respect, cruelty by consequence, and despair by hope. And in the center of it all stood a human who had chosen to care, and a dragon who had chosen to act. Kale stepped out of the prison for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The air of the surface world was sharper, colder, and filled with unfamiliar scents of alien metals, spices, and the faint hum of distant engines. Behind him, the dragon that had freed him stretched its massive wings, casting shadows that danced across the rocky canyon walls. Prisoners and guards alike watched from below, still shaken by the events that had unfolded. The world had changed for them, but for Kale it felt like stepping into something entirely new. A world where survival was not only about escaping danger, but about understanding the power of compassion. The dragon lowered itself beside him, wings folding carefully so as not to crush the small rocks beneath its weight. Its eyes, still glowing faintly, followed Kale wherever he moved. Kale could feel its intelligence, the awareness that stretched far beyond the limits of a human mind. He had learned to trust the dragon, but now he realized that the dragon had also learned from him. Weeks of quiet care, small meals, whispered stories, and patient attention had formed a bond that transcended species, culture, and expectation. Kale's first steps into freedom were cautious. He did not know where he would go, or what awaited him beyond the canyon walls. The galaxy could be dangerous, full of aliens, mercenaries, and bounty hunters, all eager to take advantage of weakness. Yet Kale felt no fear. The dragon was beside him, and he knew that the same patience and care he had shown to it had earned him protection unlike anything else in the universe. It was not strength alone that mattered, he realized. It was courage guided by compassion. As they moved across the rocky landscape, Kale began to think about the galaxy itself. He had spent months trapped underground, witnessing the cruelty of law enforced without morality. Yet now he had seen something entirely different. One human, small and unarmed, had survived not through weapons, not through power, but through loyalty and kindness. He understood that humans were often underestimated. Many creatures, many civilizations thought of humans as weak, fragile, or easily broken. Yet Kale now carried proof to the contrary. The dragon's presence drew attention as they traveled. Aliens of all shapes and sizes stared as the massive creature walked beside a human. Word spread quickly. The human who had been condemned to die had been saved by the dragon he fed in secret. Stories traveled faster than ships, and soon, across star systems, the tale of Kale began to inspire others. People whispered that humans could form bonds in ways no other species could, that trust, patience, and courage were their true weapons. Kale began to realize the impact of his actions. He did not seek recognition or fame, but he could not ignore the truth. One small act, performed in silence, had changed the course of a prison, altered the lives of countless prisoners, and earned the respect of a being far older and stronger than any human could imagine. Even the officials who had ruled with fear were forced to witness consequences for their cruelty, showing that justice could come from unexpected sources. The dragon moved with purpose, guiding Kale toward safety. Its massive wings created gusts that cleared debris and signaled authority to anyone nearby. Kale noticed that the creature was careful, ensuring that no one suffered needlessly. It had learned, as he had, that power without control could be dangerous, and that intelligence paired with care could change everything. Together they formed a new kind of partnership, one built not on domination but on mutual respect and understanding. As they traveled through distant colonies, Kale began to cook again. At first he simply prepared simple meals for himself and the dragon. But soon aliens began to watch, curious and hungry. Kale shared his knowledge, teaching others how to cook, how to blend flavors, and how food could bring species together. They were amazed that a human could do so much with so little, that one person's patience and attention to detail could have such a profound effect. News of Kale spread across star systems. Humans, once underestimated, were seen differently. Stories of the dragon and the human chef became lessons for entire civilizations. Traders, explorers, and diplomats spoke of humans as clever, compassionate, and unexpectedly influential. The galaxy began to understand that humans were capable of loyalty, courage, and moral strength, qualities that could influence events far beyond the battlefield. Kale never sought power. He did not want fame, revenge, or riches. He wanted only to live, to cook, and to share small acts of kindness. But the galaxy had noticed. Across worlds, governments reconsidered how they treated humans. Other species began to question assumptions, realizing that small, ordinary beings could inspire extraordinary outcomes. Kale had become a symbol, not because he had fought but because he had cared even when it seemed pointless. The dragon, towering and powerful, remained his companion. It did not demand obedience or loyalty in the traditional sense. It simply recognized that Kale's choices had been extraordinary. The bond between them became a quiet legend. Together they traveled through the galaxy, not as conquerors but as witnesses to the truth, that care, patience and courage could shape the universe as much as any weapon. Kale looked up at the stars that night, stretching endlessly above the alien horizon. He thought of the pit below the prison, of the weeks spent preparing meals for a creature no one else had seen. He realized that those small acts, performed in secret, had created something immense. One human had been able to survive and inspire because he had chosen kindness over fear, patience over anger, and trust over doubt. The galaxy had learned from him. Not from battles, not from conquest, but from the quiet actions of a human chef who believed that even the smallest life could matter. And as Kale prepared a meal under the alien stars with the dragon beside him, he understood the greatest lesson of all. Humans were never truly alone. If one acted with courage and care, allies might appear in the most unexpected forms, and the universe could change because of a single person's choice. From that day on, Kale's name was whispered in markets, ports, and colonies across the stars. Children told stories of the human who fed a dragon in secret. Soldiers and diplomats learned that humans could not be judged by size or strength alone. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Kale cooked, smiled, and remembered the pit beneath the prison where a bond had begun. A bond that had saved him, taught the galaxy, and proved the extraordinary potential of humanity.